Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our webinar here. We're going to be talking about preparing for your next penetration test. Presenting today, my name is David Boyd. I'm a senior security consultant here with Trusted Tech.
Yes, and I'm Nick Doerner. I'm a security consultant with Trusted Tech as well. David, can you just bring up your slide deck for a moment, please?
There we
There it
go.
is. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Yeah. So as with any good penetration test and any good IT task that needs to be done in an organization, there are a couple of hard questions that you have to ask yourself as you prepare for whatever it is, whether it be a big project, a big rollout, any sort of big IT upgrade, an OS migration, whatever it is. You need to do kind of what we have called is a ready check, and you have to ask yourself kind of some of the hard questions, right? And some of these are really high level and they're really bare bones and basic. For instance, do you have any sort of asset inventory, right? And that seems, like, haha, that's pretty, par for the course. But we have spoken to many organizations over the years that have absolutely no idea what's in their environment. They have no idea what kind of products are running, what kind of services are running, who the product owners are. And oftentimes this is because of the folks that stood up those assets have either left the organization or it was a one-time thing and then it was quickly forgotten about. Some third-party service came in and needed a box set up on the network for whatever reason, and it's still out there beaconing all these years later. So we like to say, do you have an asset inventory? Can you tell us what's in your network, what's in your environment? And it's okay if you can't. That's the great thing about hackers. We will find it. If you don't know what's in your network, we'll certainly do our best to get that for you, get that information over to you. We'll find it and we'll let you know. The other question is, do you have any sort of like patch management or some sort of patching solution? Are you patching those systems? Do you have something in place that's ensuring that anything sitting on your network is receiving the appropriate updates? Other things include a robust domain password policy. Are you ensuring that you have controls in place to protect your users from themselves, right? We all like to try to make things as easy on ourselves as we can. And that includes setting passwords and something as simple as a really robust and complex password policy will ensure that we're not taking shortcuts when it comes to setting account security. And then the other thing is, do you have a security team? Do you have folks that you can rely on and trust to help handle the security tasks, such as the patching, inventory management, things like that, as well as monitoring, detection, and detection tools? Couple quick disclaimers. Pen testing is a wildly evolving field. It is a mile deep, and tools and techniques are constantly being updated every day. Nick and I, especially, it seems like every week we have to learn a new technique to try to evade the latest product. There's been an update to a tool. This tool's broken now because of this thing. So we are constantly having to evolve our tradecraft as time goes on. So not all solutions are going to fit in all environments. Obviously, for the purposes of this webinar, we're not going to be able to talk about every tool and technique that's out there. We're just kind of giving you a general overview of how we think and how attackers think, and kind of giving you some tips and tricks to bring home and think about, okay, it's time for a pen test. How do we be as prepared as possible for this? The other reminder is the best time to start was yesterday, and the second best time to start is now. There is never an optimal time to run any sort of pen test. There's never an optimal time to run a purple team or a red team. The best time is just to do it, especially if it's your first one, or especially if it has been a few years since you've run one. It's better just to go ahead and do it. You could spend months preparing and trying to get everything just perfect, but just like having a baby or starting at the gym, it's better just to do it, just to start it and go. Things will improve over time, but you won't know what's wrong until you know what's wrong, and you can't improve what you don't know. So get started on that. Nick, you want to talk about the maturation cycle?
Absolutely. So, looking at a maturation cycle and seeing how we're ready for penetration testing as a whole, we kind of start really low. We start with these vulnerability scans, right? So, we're looking for any vulnerabilities that are going to be generally picked up by something like a commercially available tool. This might be something like Nessus or a similar product, and going through and patching, making sure that everything's up to date and signified in there as secure as far as vulnerability scanning goes. However, that's not the end all be all, right? A lot of the times when we go through and we see vulnerability scans or we see organizations that work a lot with their vulnerability scanning, when they get to the penetration testing phase, they may have a lot of issues that come up that you don't necessarily see from vulnerability scan. These may be things like misconfigurations, weak password policies, MFA not being enabled in certain places, things along those lines. So that's where your pen test gets a little bit more into the weeds from a technical standpoint, and you're taking a look at what are the different ways an attacker can still get in even though everything's patched and up to date, and the scans come back clean. We're still looking at different ways that we can take advantage of the system's assets in the environment to either get a foothold or escalate privileges and get domain admin. And then after that, we take a look at purple teaming. So this is a little bit more taking a look at your monitoring detection, seeing if you can figure out what are the ways that attackers are trying to get in, and how can we get that response and get that alert and notification that those actions are being undertaken on the network. And then do we initiate an incident response from there, or do we take what's our next steps, what's our next actions. And then we go into the red team, which is a bit more full scope, and that's really trying to stay low and slow, under the radar, very quiet as much as possible, trying to go undetected, and seeing if all of those portions from vulnerability scan and penetration testing and purple teaming, kind of pull all together, and seeing if those controls that you've put in place from those different techniques are going to properly stop a red team or a real threat, or something that is simulated as close to a real threat as possible.
For sure. The other thing to remember about too is in terms of red teaming, that usually happens after a couple of cycles of some pen testing and maybe a cycle of purple teaming, and that's to ensure that you are fully prepared for that full scope red team, and that's more goal based, right? Like Nick was saying, we're going to stay under the radar as much as possible, try not to trigger any alerts or detections. And we'll usually have goals set out as we talk to the product owners, with the goal being, maybe they've stuck a file on the share over here, or we want you to access, this one particular box over there, as opposed to finding all of the vulnerabilities or as many vulnerabilities in your network as possible. This is more if a real world attacker were to utilize any of these methods that you see here, external, internal, wireless, web app, SE, physical, what could they get, right? What is the overall inherent damage or system resources that they could gather from any of this access in? One of the ways that we've seen from breaches is from the external, so internet-facing assets. You'll often find attackers trying to work their way in, right? That's where you hear oftentimes on the news and things, script kiddies, quote unquote, sitting in their basement and trying to pop into networks. It's usually from the internet-facing perspective, right? So that's from the outside in. Some of the most common things that we've seen and that we've been seeing in the last few years, still in 2025, is a lack of multi-factor authentication on any sort of service that offers internal access. So, for instance, if you have an external facing VPN per se, or you're using any of the Microsoft 365 services, there'll be a lack of MFA. Folks aren't using either one of the built-in or a third-party MFA solution. And if we utilize something like a password spray attack, for instance, if there's no MFA and we come upon a lucky hit on a weaker common password, well, now we're in. There's nothing stopping us. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Nick.
absolutely. And adding to the MFA ideology here is we've run into MFA before, and it's something that we bring up quite often when we do a pen test for our clients and we're able to get by it. Is anything with push notifications for MFA. We
Hmm.
found to be a little bit less secure than, say, number matching. So, for example, we've come into situations where I've been on a pen test, I've got credentials from an external standpoint. We see MFAs in place, but to push notifications. So I might wait until roughly the time someone might be just coming into the office to send that push notification. Or if we're not really getting anywhere with that, we might just send them numerous push notifications over the course of a very short span of time. Sometimes the user at the end behind that account might get really annoyed, and then they're just going to go throw their hands up and go, we're just going to accept it. I don't know what's wrong with my account today. I'm going to let this MFA go and just let it push in. And when we do that, then next thing we're in an email account, we're on a VPN. We've got initial access or a foothold into a system using that person's account, even though MFA is enabled. And
Mhm.
for that reason, we usually recommend doing something with number matching. It's a lot more difficult for us to get through. Usually, it's going to require some secondary social engineering component to get past that number matching with MFA, and
Mhm.
that's something that really adds just another layer of defense for your users at the end of the day.
Right, yeah. And the other nice thing with the push notifications from an attacker perspective is if you could figure out, what time zone they're sitting in. Oftentimes, what I'll do if I've got a weak credential, I know I can trigger an MFA response. I'll time it so that it's around when they would be coming into the office anyways, or logging into their computer anyways. So 8 or 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I'll time it so that they're opening their computer and logging in around the same time, so it kind of matches when they would already be receiving those notifications anyways. To try to fool them into thinking it's a legitimate push. Weak passwords, we've touched on this a little bit. That goes along with that robust domain password policy. It's 2025, and unfortunately, season year is still a very common password that we see, and we'll emphasize this a few times in this webinar. Season year, or month year, or company name year, or password one. Even all these many years later, these are still very common password patterns that we're seeing. And there are solutions. There are third-party solutions, and Microsoft offers solutions for blacklisting those passwords so that you can set a custom password blacklist in your environment that will prevent users from setting those passwords. You can put keywords and things in there so that when they go to set their password, they can't use those. Another thing we see is unnecessary services exposed to the internet. Really, you should be trying to limit everything that you have on the internet as much as possible. 80 and 443 should, for the most part, just be the max that is exposed, right? You don't need SMB on the internet. You just don't need RDP on the internet. The most you should be able to need for your clients or for whoever is going to be 80 and 443 there. There are some one-off cases, obviously, but for the most part, that's it. For starting an external penetration test, usually what attackers will do is they'll start with something like user enumeration. Um, for the most part, this is going to be much harder to detect or put a stop to. But again, this kind of just gives you an idea of like, okay, how would somebody try to get in, right? They'll often try to pull old documents that you may have sitting out on your web server or sitting out there on the internet for your clients to see, whether it be information sheets, things like that. And we'll try to pull usernames out of the metadata that's in those documents. And that'll usually give you an idea of, are they using first dot last or first initial last name, something along those lines. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and add to that too. You can't really do a whole lot to protect yourself against this type of user enumeration. There's also a lot of sites out there. One really good example that we use quite often is Hunter.io.
Yeah.
More of a business to business, leads sales type platform, but you can use it to find the general username format, and that's what we're really looking for. Is it first initial last name? Is it first name dot last name at TLD? And then when you take that information, we can plug that in with, things like census data. We can reconfigure names that we know that are out there, more common names, and then reconfigure those to be in that format. And then when we test those, we'll end up getting back a whole lot of usernames that we can then use for password spraying. So
Mhm.
since this section isn't really something that you can do a whole lot against, usually a recommendation, and like David said, we'll be touching on this quite a bit, is going to be, making sure that that MFA is enabled, making sure that those passwords are really strong. So even though we're able to, enumerate John Doe at companyname.com, we can't necessarily spray it with something like Spring 2025 and then immediately get some sort of access to that inbox or that user's account.
For our blue teamers that may be watching, as well as upcoming pen testers, CISOs, CTOs, any of you folks that are watching, we'll put some tools up on some of these slides. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just kind of a high level. Here's some of the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis. I strongly recommend that you take a few minutes, set up a lab environment, go download these tools, go play with them, go run them in your environment, go look at the source code, figure out what makes them tick and how they work. What are they calling out to? What are they doing? That will really help you understand, okay, what should I be trying to trigger on? What should I be trying to look for? How does this tool work? And that will really help you better understand when you have those conversations with your pen tester later on. You're able to have that back and forth and be able to better understand their mindset and what they're thinking and doing and why they're doing these things. Password spraying again, that's a big thing. Once we've got usernames, whether it be from metadata or your contact us list on your website, or from launching statistically likely usernames with something like OneDrive user enum or team filtration, we'll then start trying to spray usually your Microsoft 365 services or any sort of web portals that we find that have a login page with something like Burp Suite. We'll use Team Filtration, which is a tool developed by Melvin Langvik here at Trusted Sec, and we'll try to limit how much we spray and when we spray to avoid lockouts and to avoid triggering smart lockout. But the days of, oh, they've got smart lockout, we've got to throw our hands up and give up. Those are gone. We can usually work around that. So don't rely too heavily on smart lockout. It's a great feature that Microsoft has. But if we see that it's not an automatic game over, we lose. We can usually try to work around that as best as possible.
Yeah, and when we're looking at password spraying, one of the things that we're always looking for here is anything that we can use. We're always going for those weak passwords, default passwords, but we're always looking for any information that we can find to help enhance that password spraying. So
Mhm.
one thing that we do here at Trusted Sec is we always take a look and we see, is there any leaked information we know that's out there? So has someone tried to use that email address that's associated with the company or organization on a third-party website, and has that information been leaked? Do we have access to passwords that we know that aren't necessarily as weak as company name, year, season, year, month, year, but maybe we know that this user's been using like their dog's name or something like that as a password on to various sites. Those are passwords we'll absolutely use and attempt to use against different organizations as well. And going in and making sure, hey, is this user reusing passwords across multiple sites along with their work or organization email account? When we do that, one of the places that you can definitely look and see if there's any information out there. Have I been pwned is a great resource. Taking a look at what users you have in your organization. Maybe they've signed up for it could be legitimate organizational needs as well. There's plenty of websites that get data breaches out there, but seeing and understanding that those passwords are out there and either having that type of education with your users at the end of the day, or making sure that those passwords that are known to have been leaked aren't allowed to be used within your environment, putting those on a deny list, making sure that they're not possibly being able to be used by any of your users is really important to making sure that these password sprays really fail across the board.
hmm Yeah, Dhashed is another great tool for that. You can get on Dhashed, throw your domain in there, take a look at anybody that may have been using their company email in something that may have been breached. That's a great tool too, and that's a great tip that Nick said about if you see these passwords on something like Dhashed or Have I Been Pwned, go ahead and throw them in your banned password list to prevent users from reusing them in your environment. Some of the exposed services that we see too, again, size. Every now and then we still run into RDP on the internet. And there are one-off use cases where that may be a necessity. It's a legacy system or something, and that's how you have your customers or vendors or whatever for whatever reason come in. But the general recommendation is don't have RDP on the internet. You certainly don't need SMB exposed to the internet either. You need to go through and audit your systems, and it doesn't have to be done before the pen test. Like I said, we're going to do our darnest to find it. But as a quick like check, what do we have exposed? What's sitting out there? More often than not, we found, old Windows 2012 boxes that had RDP just sitting on the internet. There was one time I found a network config that was exposed and unpassworded, and the poor client had no idea that had just been sitting out there. Some vendor had worked on it and forgot to button it up appropriately afterwards, and it just left it sitting out there, and he wasn't sure for how long it was. And that's the kind of things that we try to avoid seeing.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, with the exposed services, we're also looking, while we are looking for that restriction to 80 and 443, we're also looking for any type of restrictions in there that we can make sure that users don't necessarily need that might be open and active. So 80 and 443, specifically, if you're looking at something like WordPress or anything that might have some sort of management interface, making sure that that management is locked down and that you can't really access it from the outside as well is something that we always recommend too. Having access to administrative portals where you can potentially brute force either a password or something like that to try to get in. Taking that so that you have to be, either on a VPN or have some alternative access route is something we generally recommend. Just make sure that you don't have that just exposed outbound, and people can't just go and start trying to do nefarious things with that over time.
Mm. Yeah, very good. Very good. So, and we've harped on it a few times, but how do we make it hard for the hackers to mess around with your external facing environments? And again, it's very high level and it's very simple, but really and truly patching your systems, knowing what's in your environment, patching those systems appropriately, removing those systems that you no longer need, keeping your services that are exposed limited as much as possible, um, enforcing things like smart lockouts, um, removing document metadata, so inventorying whatever documents you have just sitting out there. If you've got old inventory sheets from 2003, really ask yourself, do we need these sitting on the internet? And if so, just go in there, scrub the metadata out of them. You can remove the author's name and the username and things like that from it pretty easily, and then you can re-upload them. Absolutely MFA everything and MFA it correctly. I know we've emphasized on that. Have number matching as opposed to push notifications. And then you'll hear this a few more times before the end of this presentation, ensuring that you have a complex password policy in place. Complex meaning, and a good tip for this is taking the word password out of your vernacular and your vocabulary and starting to use passphrase is a little psychological trick for yourself and for your users that you can start to implement. We don't use passwords, we use passphrases, right? So, say we're successful in an external penetration test or from an external facing presence, internet facing presence, and we can get in, right? We were able to do some ways to get in, right? Some of the most common things that we've seen are the weak and common password sprays, like we said, either bypassing the MFA or not having to worry about MFA at all, doing the push notification exhaustion for the user so they just accept it, hopping on the VPN and then getting in that way. Another common way is through social engineering. A good phishing email, crafted correctly, is still, able to get us internal access. Phone calls. Everyone remembers the scattered spider attacks from a few years ago. Which, if you're not familiar with that, the 10-second synopsis of that is a group of nefarious individuals called some casinos, acted like they were the user, convinced the help desk that they were the user, and they were able to do an account takeover. The nice thing about that is that's not a new pretext. That's not a new way in. That's relatively novel and something that we've been doing for years. It just hit the mainstream, so suddenly everyone was aware of it. Physical access, that's near and dear to my heart. Getting physical access into your environment or into your building is another way that we've been very successful in getting in, doing a device drop on the network. And then a lot of clients, what they'll opt to do, and what's very popular is for at least for penetration testing purposes, they'll do either an assumed breach or device drop. So we'll mail a computer that calls back to our mothership. You'll plug it into your network wherever a regular user would sit, and then we'll perform testing in that way. That's where most firms have gone over the last decade or so, and it has worked well.
Yeah, and oh, can I just add real quick to
Yeah.
MFA here? So MFA with VPN specifically, that's something that we've run into quite a few times now, where we're seeing MFA generally on user accounts for VPN access. That's something that's becoming a very standard practice, and we're seeing quite often. One thing to double check though is one, that MFA is affecting all the services possible for any given account. We have seen instances where we'll use a tool such as MFA Suite, and we'll see that MFA is enabled for a bunch of services, but then there's some that it's not necessarily enabled on, and we can get access to those services with just username and password.
Hmm.
And the other thing there too is to make sure you're taking a look at who has access to the VPN and why. While we do see a lot of MFA across a lot of users for VPN access, we might get access to an account that looks like, it may be a service account, it may be like a general inbox account, and that account does have access to the VPN but doesn't have MFA on the account because it's used by so many different users.
Hmm.
Making sure that is cleaned up and making sure that the MFA is in place for any type of account that has access to the internal environment. That's going to go a lot further in making sure that even though you have MFA on your users, the ones that are getting into your environment, and even ones that you don't necessarily need to get into your environment, making sure that that's cleaned up and taken care of is going to be huge for making sure that nobody can get access, especially with a weak password.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And that's where kind of it ties into the idea of inventorying your assets. That's not just your physical assets. When I say inventorying your assets, I also mean your user accounts. That's part of the inventory process. You want to see, even every quarter, who's in our environment, what kind of access do they have, what access have we given them, do we need to revoke that access? Is that user even still active? Has their job title changed or their job role changed? Anything like that. So similar to the external, once we're inside the internal network, again, this is very general and high level. We'll start with some internal initial enumeration. We'll look at things like your domain information. So where are we sitting? You can use things like the Nmap broadcast script to try to find some very basic general domain information. We'll look for things like domain controllers, anything that's broadcasting DNS, or we'll look for things like null sessions. We still do see, even now, some environments where null sessions are enabled on domain controllers. And if that misconfiguration is in play, that usually lets you enumerate even more information and enumerate things like users without even really going through too much effort there. We'll start to look for things like unpatched systems or unpatched or outdated operating systems. So a lot of times there's still legacy boxes sitting out there, sitting on the network that for one reason or another either still needed to be on the network because they performed this one critical function, or they had a piece of software or an application running on it that was only ever made for that unsupported operating system. And there's just no way they can live without it. There's no way they can upgrade it. Those are those one-off cases, but usually, if that is the case, we'll try to see if we can find it. We're still finding MS-17 MS-08067. We're still finding Gameware, different things like that on our internals. And usually sometimes there's a good reason. It's, oh, that's a box that is mission critical and we can't do anything about it. And sometimes it's, oh, we didn't realize that that box was still on and sitting out there.
Yeah, and just to add to some of these misconfigurations and all of this initial enumeration, for the most part, there's not a whole lot. There's definitely steps that you can take to help mitigate some of the initial enumeration and things like that. But a lot of this we're going in, and as a penetration tester, you're generally going in unauthenticated at this point still. So you're going in and you're just taking a look, seeing what the systems are telling you, what information is there, and what's behind those systems. So if I'm going in, for example, and I'm using a tool called NetExec, and I'm looking at SMB for all the hosts within scope for a test, and I see, a few dozen to a couple hundred of them don't have SMB signing enabled. That's definitely something I'm going to target very quickly, especially going in with the tooling that we have now and being able to relay connections over to that. We'll get into that in a little bit in just a moment here with initial access.
Mm.
But that enumeration and going through and making sure that even from a high level, when you're seeing things from an enumeration standpoint, if it looks like it's going to be difficult to break into, that's a really good sign, at least starting out for a penetration test. A lot of the clients that I work with, if I go in and I see that the SMB signing is enabled across the board, if I go in and I see the LDAP signing and bindings enabled across the board, if I don't see any null sessions, I don't see anything that's missing any patches that's really standing out from a high level view. I know I'm going to be in for a fairly rough test or a fairly intensive test as far as how much effort is it going to be to achieve our objectives and goals for that penetration test for this session.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Initially, once we've, established some sort of foothold, again, unauthenticated foothold on the internal network, whether it be a device drop, social engineering, or something like that. We'll start things like the tool responder for hash captures. We'll usually start that analyze mode and listen quietly and see if we can even find any broadcasts. What we're looking for there is old broadcasts from LMNNR, NetBIOS, different things like that. We'll start looking at coercion, unauthenticated coercion attempts with something like Petit Tam or Coercer. We'll look for IPv6 misconfigurations with something like Minim6. We'll look for things like SMB signing, whether or not that is not enabled, or LDAP signing, whether or not that is enabled or not. And then you can usually use an in packet toolkit for that NTLM recon or NTLM relay, I should say, to relay those SMB connections against those unsigned hosts. We'll also look at old naming conventions on computers with a tool called Pre2K. You could also do a time roast attack. Those are both very similar. That takes advantage of if computer passwords were set, again, in pre-2K, with the password being the host name of the computer. We have tools and things that can help us identify those. We'll look for things like Cisco phones and try to scrape username and passwords out of the Cisco phone configuration files there. Misconfigured Cisco switches, anything that might have SMI enabled, because that can often contain domain credentials. Printers, you can do a passback attack on printers and try to yank, domain credentials that were stored there for whatever reason during setup. Um, Anything else?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So taking a look, and one of the biggest misconfigurations that I see quite often is SMB signing disabled.
Hmm.
And that's something that you're going to definitely see if you're doing any type of internal vulnerability scanning on your own, or you're doing vulnerability assessments on your own as well. But just keep in mind, it is something that's generally rated, at least if you look at it in something, say, like a Nessa scan, it's going to be rated as a medium. So generally, you wouldn't really go in and be like, okay, we really need to take care of this right now. But that one is probably one of my biggest initial access ways in, specifically because even though SMB signings, disabled, you can get access to a user account essentially by relaying that connection with NTLM Relay X through the Impacket tool suite. And then you have, if depending on what account you have, you might have admin access to that box. I can tell you in the last 6 months now, I've seen at least 5 different clients where SMB signing was disabled on
Mm.
domain controllers, and then we had a domain admin that we relayed the connection to, and it was a really low effort. Initial access actually got us DA in that situation. Going in and making sure that that low hanging fruit is really wrapped up, and those situations aren't able to occur. Those are really important in making sure that the tester is not just going to go in and immediately get domain admin, but also that you're locking down a lot of these kind of easier paths to take advantage of. These are
Mm.
something that, as far as a complexity rating goes, I would say novice to average level. Just about anyone can really run these tools. There's tons of blogs out there. There's tons of ways to figure out how to get them running, and
Mhm.
it's something that we see really often still even today. And we understand a lot of it can come down to being industry specific. Sometimes manufacturing might have to have SMB signing disabled for whatever reason, so that some tools can communicate or work together. But making sure that you take steps to be proactive about it. And if there is any situation where SMB signing does have to be disabled, making sure that it's segmented off, or there's different controls in place to make sure that it can't be taken advantage of, are really huge, in my mind, at least from what I've seen from my testing over the last couple of years.
For sure, yeah. I also saw that there were a couple good questions in the chat window here, and we'll definitely get to those getting towards the end of the presentation. So we see them. Keep sending them. Those are fantastic questions. So if any of these are successful, this will give us an initial foothold. And there's probably a dozen other attacks that we haven't touched on here. This is just a general high level overview. But oftentimes, any of these, half dozen or dozen or so attempts will land us, more often than not, a foothold on the network. So, a foothold, the definition of that being some sort of authenticated user, usually within your domain. So, the most common of that being responder. There are a lot of tools that are detecting responder at the moment now. So if you're not familiar with that tool, start getting familiar with it. It's a pen tester's best friend, but it could also be our worst enemy if you are able to detect it. And we've got a slide here coming up that'll give you some tips on that. Once we have an initial foothold on the network, again, usually a low-level domain user or a regular domain user, we start privilege escalation. And the whole goal with that being to try to see just how high up within the network we can get in terms of our privileges, right? Domain admin or enterprise admin being, the top level of that. That's typically not the end of the pen test. Oh, we got DA and it's game over. That's just another goal. That's just another step we try to take. Because once you get to that level, it makes accessing sensitive files and looking for juicy content that much easier. So, again, some tools that we like to use, a few high-level ones. We love the Impact Packet Toolkit for both initial enumeration and privilege escalation. You can do a curb roasting attack with that. Certify is a great toolkit that looks at ADCS enumeration and helps us hunt down any sort of misconfigurations within ADCS. Certify blew up just a couple of years ago, I believe, and it has really been, I would say, one of the more common methods for privilege escalation. Wouldn't you say, Nick?
Yeah,
At least
I
in the
would say
last
you're
few years.
absolutely right. Even to this day, I'm still getting domain administrative access off of CertiPy, specifically ADCS. We're looking at those low-level misconfigurations, and a lot of them are just kind of out there. They could be because it's an old instance. It could be that you've been deploying templates, and they're just old and have been left enabled. But that kind of
Mhm.
comes back to some of that asset inventory and management. Maybe there's a lot of those templates are there that you're using for testing purposes that no one disabled. Maybe there's old ones in there that you were using for some sort of system or service or account, and you don't need it anymore. Going in and cleaning those up and making sure that only the people who need access to them have access to them, and making sure that only the ones that you really need to have enabled are enabled.
Mhm.
That's a huge step, and honestly, taking kind of the fight to ADCS and making sure that that's as locked down as possible. That's one of the ways that we get our really easy wins when we're trying to go for domain admin, but locking that down is going to lock us out of a lot of the pathing that we have been using in the last couple of years now. If you go back to back when Eternal Blue was first really big, and we had tooling for that, it took a few years to kind of catch up. We're kind of hitting that point that we're seeing in the industry right now, where CertiPy is starting to get cleaned up across the board. A lot of people have been tagged on it on pen tests over the last 3 years now, and a lot of people are taking proactive steps to make sure that it can't be either used and taken advantage of again, or taken advantage of in the first place.
Right, yeah. And it goes again with that network hygiene. It's going back to inventorying. I know we keep hitting on that, but really having some good network hygiene also includes reviewing your ADCS configurations, reviewing those CAs, reviewing those configurations that you have set up. Every now and then you get a vendor that needs to set up this or that or whatever for whatever temporary task or purpose that they have, and going in there and inventorying that and cleaning that up as part of your just like quarterly tasks would be really good there. Um, just gonna give you an idea of our flow. We'll usually do something like herb roasting. We'll grab the accounts that have SPNs configured. We'll start trying to crack those hashes that we captured. We'll throw those up on our in-house password cracker. While those are cracking, we'll often then pivot over and look at your ADCS environment, see if we can determine any misconfigurations there. And then usually between one of those two, we're able to get DA in a very high percentage of our environments. If there's nothing misconfigured with Certify, we can usually crack one of the SPNs. Those are higher level service accounts, and then we can do something like a credential snowball, where we start accessing other boxes with that service account, looking for things like passwords stored in LSA secrets. We might dump SAM databases if we're not worried about making a little bit of noise. We'll start trying to pass the hash with a tool called NetExec. There are several other tools within the Impact tool suite that we'll use. And then a big one is Bloodhound. We will, or LDAP domain dump. We usually run both. Will gather, what Bloodhound does is it will gather all of the domain information within your domain related to your users, computers, groups, GPOs, things like that, and then feeds it into a nice graphical, map that you can then go through and run different queries and manipulate that data to figure out what might be the shortest paths to DA, for instance. You can run a series of queries against this and try to figure out, oh, Bob in accounting has local admin access to this box over here in finance, and this DA had logged into that box within the last 30 days for whatever reason, and he had a session on there. So if I can get Bob's password, get on that box, dump the DA, now I have DA, right? It just kind of visualizes, all the different attack paths. Um, Figuring out any of these tools, again, if you're a blue teamer, CTO, CISO, figuring out how these tools tick and what you can do to defend against them is going to make it really, really hard for a pen tester.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like one way that I really see often, which I really enjoy, well, kind of enjoy seeing, is when you're going through and let's say you're using NetExec, for example, the first thing we're going to look at, if we don't have that Bloodhound data on hand, is we're going to see, what shares does the user have access to? What is there somewhere we can dig into and see if we can't find, passwords stored in plain text or something like that. Uh, there's a lot of alerting and a lot of tools out there that are analysis based and taking a look at behaviors of the users at within your domain and your environment. If some user is looking at, trying to authenticate to every single share in your environment over the course of 2 minutes, there's a really good chance that that's not legitimate activity, right? That's probably somebody either trying to do something nefarious, might be somebody trying to do some enumeration or look around. Those are really good kind of easy ways to detect that somebody's account's been compromised, and then you start your either your instant response or if it's a penetration test, letting them know that they've been caught and things like that. But really going in and each one of these steps, especially on the internal side, that we've been going through. A lot of these have different detection methods and capabilities out there, and making sure that those capabilities in there, if you're a bit more of a mature organization from a security standpoint, and you're able to go in and detect those activities, that's just going to put you another step ahead of everybody else out there um, as far as security goes, and making sure that when somebody does get in, if somebody does get in, you're able to detect it and respond appropriately versus, having someone live in there for a few months, either living off the land or trying to slowly collect as much information and get access where they can.
Hmm. Another one I see more often than not, even now in 2025, is folks will leave notes in the user description fields within their domain environments, and oftentimes in those notes you will find passwords, and it may not be that user's password, it might be a password for something else. But when we dump that domain information, that one of the first things I go to is look for anything in the user description field that might help me. When you're doing something like PCI, for instance, a lot of environments will use a jump box, and in the user description field, it will say, used for jump box host. Well, there we go. That's the account that I want if I'm trying to get into their PCI environment.
Absolutely.
Once we've got DA, we start on some post exploitation activities. This usually includes things like artifact hunting. We start hunting for sensitive files, looking at your protected shares, trying to find information that would be considered sensitive to you. And we also do password recovery. So you might do something like obtaining your ntds.dit file off your domain controller, which contains all of the username and password hashes for your domain. And then we'll start to work on cracking those and providing statistics based on the cracked passwords that we see. In this day and age, even now, we're still achieving very high crack rates, and we're still seeing, even with the battle with the IT folks, trying to initiate these really strong uh, password complexity settings. There are still users that are getting around it with things like summer 2025, spring 2025. It's a longer password, sure, and there's more complexity, but it's a repeated word and it's a common word, and we're eventually going to catch it. So how do we make it all difficult? How do we make the internal access as difficult as possible? We've kind of made this, three layers, right? You have your easy stuff that you can do that's easy for you all and makes it just a little bit harder for the pen tester. Medium is going to be a little more work for your IT guys and your blue team. And then hard mode is going to make it hard mode and really just ruin a pen tester's day or a hacker's day. Some of the easy stuff includes patching your systems. Again, I know that we emphasize that, but that goes hand in hand with knowing what's in your environment and what all you can do to patch up or remove unnecessary hosts in your environment, enabling SMB signing and LDAP signing. doing some share and file hygiene, not storing passwords in plain texts in open shares. I think we both have seen that a few times here, even this year, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and getting specific to the plain text information stored in shares, that may be depending on your environment. This is something that I see really often, especially in any organization that has a dedicated development team or a dev team. Restricting one access to those shares, but also making sure that that hygiene is there. Even though it's a test environment, a lot of the time there's still private keys that can be stored in there, usernames and passwords for test accounts, things like that. And more often than not, when we run into a dev team that's within the organization we're targeting, we see really poor hygiene in their test environments. And even though they are just test environments, it usually does trickle down into the AD overall. And then we're able to get access and kind of escalate privileges and permissions, especially to the boxes that they might be working on. So that's something I always like to kind of call out and just make people aware of, is that even though it is a test environment, even though they are test credentials, it is still something that we're able to take advantage of and that we generally want to see cleaned up and as secure as possible.
Mhm. The other kind of easy thing that can be done is enabling LAPS, local admin password solution. This is from Microsoft. It's a free tool. Randomizes your local admin passwords on your hosts, and stores them all in a nice encrypted database so that each host individually has a unique password. So that helps mitigate any risk that may be involved with a pass the hash attack, for instance. We still see many environments, they have some sort of solution that can help them image systems and then send those images out, and then they can deploy 50 images in just a few minutes. The problem is all 50 of those images have the same admin password. And if we find that, well, now we have local admin to those 50 systems. So enabling laps. For the medium level stuff, shutting off old broadcasts. So Elementor, NetBIOS, these are not, for most environments, I'm gonna say this tentatively, for most environments, these are not needed anymore. That was Windows' way or Microsoft's way back in the day of saying, we want everything to work with everything correctly. So we're going to have these legacy broadcasts still enabled here even in 2025. And for the most part, for most environments, you can get away with shutting those off, right? Enforcing a really complex password policy and then training your users on this password policy, right? This is where I said little key things like getting the word password out of your vernacular and using passphrases, allying with your users and speaking with your users about how best to set complex passwords and how best to meet this and why we're doing this, right? Why are we doing this? Getting them to ally with you as opposed to there being a fight on it is really going to help with that. So that when you go and you do your password rotations and things, they're able to better understand why it is they have to type in a 15-character password. Alongside that, enabling users to use a password manager, a really good password manager would help with that as well, because then you can enforce these really complex password policies and then not get the kickback from, "Oh, well, I'm never going to remember a 15-character password." That's what the password vault is for.
So,
The other
David,
things are, oh, go ahead.
just to jump in here, we are coming up on time. We do have about 9 minutes left. So, just to make sure we have time for questions here, we might want to just get through the last portion a little bit speedy.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll just speed through this here. Start to ingest your alerts into a SIEM. Go get a SIEM, ingest your alerts into it. At a bare minimum, you should be able to detect things like brute force authentication attacks, password spraying, broadcast and ARP poisoning, DHCP 6 poisoning, NTLM relaying, curb roasts, and scanning of any sort of RCE vulnerabilities, so things like Metasploit. Start looking at implementing and utilizing EDR, XDR, as well as honeypots and honey creds and honey tokens. And the last thing is the hard mode. This is the stuff that just makes it a nightmare to try to test in environments. When I see this, I just know it's going to be a hard week for me. Disabling host-to-host SMB, limiting the number of DA accounts you have, and only allowing them to log into your domain controller, not using your DAs as a daily driver. There are solutions that let you check out your DA account, do the one-time use thing, task, whatever it is that you need to do, and then when you check it back into this solution, it rotates that password, immediately wipes it, and gives you a new password. Honey creds are another good thing to implement. Our very own Ben Malk actually wrote a tool that ingests or injects fake credentials into your network that Responder will pick up. And then you can be alerted that something like Responder is running on your network. And then user behavior analytics, that's another big one. Figuring out what is a baseline for your users and what is outside of the norm. So, like Nick mentioned earlier, Bob in accounting logging into 50 devices within the same 3 minutes is probably unusual user behavior. You need to be alerted on that. So implementing some sort of solution or looking into user behavior analytics, getting a baseline set up, and then keeping an eye on that. That's really going to get you that quick alerting that you want to try to prevent, attackers from being able to run rampant on the network.
Perfect. So if we want to jump right into questions, David, I do see we have quite a few here. I do see one is quite long. If you want to start reading that one, and I'll answer the second one while you.
You're good.
Yeah.
Um,
So I
so
see.
Darren asked us in 2025, what tools and techniques have proven effective for password spraying against clients operating solely within GCP? In environments that are fully native cloud first, no on-prem AD, no hybrid identity AD sync server, and relying purely on Azure Enta, what methods have helped you gain initial access for an internal penetration test or initial access into the internal network? So I'll answer that part. And full disclosure, I am not a cloud expert by any means at all. There is a tool suite called Road Recon that the cloud team does use. We do have a cloud team that does that. And they really like the tool Road Recon to try to help enumerate and take advantage of any misconfigurations within Azure Entra to help facilitate some of the attacks on that. And then the other question was, when testing M365 accounts with password spraying, are you still finding success with password spraying given their current security posture? What tools are performing best in your experience, particularly when rotating IPs via AWS or other infrastructure to avoid detection or rate limiting? And that's where that toolkit team filtration has really been crucial for us. We love team filtration. We love all the work that Melvin's done on that tool. That has built-in rotating that does kickback alerts when you come up on things like smart lockouts. It does let us know if MFA is enabled in certain environments. We really like team filtration. So if you want to look at something that we use on a nearly daily basis, that's definitely one there. Oh, we did
Great.
get a lot. Go ahead. Go ahead for the next one.
Absolutely. I did add, if you look in answer, David, there's one I added a GitHub repo to, just if you want to verify that as well.
Perfect.
So we do have a question right here. Should we expect our penetration tester to be able to find open vulnerabilities or find a list of vulnerabilities they found not patched, even if it wasn't the entry port or how they compromised the system? So this is one that I will take and I will put out there as this is my opinion. In my opinion, every penetration test should include some sort of vulnerability scanning, and it should have some sort of reporting on those vulnerabilities identified. Now, generally, we're not really looking for things like SSL, TLS on an internal vulnerability scan, right? But we are
Mhm.
looking for unpatched systems. We're looking for, systems that are out of date, and those should be at least listed from an unauthenticated standpoint. You're going to get really a lot of results and a lot of information that you have to sift through if you're doing an unauthenticated scan, because then it's going to look at, what version of Chrome's installed, what version of Firefox is installed, things like that. Whereas
Mhm.
when you're going in and just looking from an external unauthenticated standpoint in relation to the host, you're going to be looking at what services are open, what vulnerabilities are there, and they may not be actionable vulnerabilities. So you may see, there may be a new critical vulnerability, but there's no proof of concept code out there. There's no publicly available code. It's still something that we would still like to see patched, and especially from a compliance standpoint, or if you're looking at PCI or anything like that, it is absolutely something that should be brought to your attention and should be reported on. So I would absolutely say yes.
Okay. Next question. Are there any issues with disabling null sessions? Could that potentially break anything, or is there something that should just be off period? For the most part, we have not seen it break anything. Again, quick disclaimer. As with anything, there may be a one-off application or some custom in-house application or something that relies on it. But for the most part, it's usually pretty safe to go ahead and disable those null sessions. In fact, it's recommended on your domain controllers that it not be enabled. So as with anything, any recommendations that we make, try it out in a test environment first, try it out on just one host first, and then slowly roll it out over time. And I'll grab the next one here too. How often are you using C2 on internals, and which C2 do you typically use? I'd say it's hit or miss. If we usually reserve C2 for those longer scope red teams, those 6 and 8 week red teams where we're just trying to get a foothold on maybe one box, and then we're trying to use that as a home base, or we're trying to establish C2 back to us. We have our own in-house internal C2s that we use for those. If I do end up needing a C2 on say a longer internal, like a 2 week or something, um, there's a couple different solutions out there. Sliver's pretty good. There's Bad Rats. We really like Bad Rats, or the developer for that, is on our team as well. So those are both two good ones to look at. Oh,
Absolutely.
here's a good one we can both answer. What advice do you have for a cybersecurity graduate trying to get a full-time pen testing role? How best can I prepare myself? Should I start with bug bounty or freelance? Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. So generally, I work a lot with students outside of my main job here at Trusted Sec, and I generally point them towards it. It really depends first off on what you want to do for pen testing. So we say pen testing, but it's a very general term. There's a lot of specializations you can do in there. So for me specifically, I specialize in net and AD pen testing. So I'm really looking at internal networks, external networks. We can also do, web application penetration testing, things like that. That's a bit of a different skill set, bit of a different drive and motivation there. If you're looking for any type of AD, I always recommend there's a GitHub repository out there called Game of Active Directory or GOAD, and
Hmm.
it pulls down, it installs a really vulnerable environment and gets you a really good feeling for those tools and figuring out how they work and how you can use them in a AD environment. Bug bounty and freelance are usually two things I tend to avoid a little bit, specifically because there's a lot of effort you can put in with not a whole lot of returns. Generally, I like to go the path of learning first, and going into environments that you know are vulnerable or that have issues that you can exploit. So things like Hack the Box,
Hmm.
and GoAd, things like that, where you can test your skills, figure out where your shortcomings might be, and then figure out how to better educate to gain those skill sets and those skill requirements. Whereas bug bounty, you might spend 2-3 days on an application that's a part of a bounty, and you might not find anything that's necessarily there. And that might just be an experience shortcoming. It might be a shortcoming with the application itself, just not having very many vulnerabilities because of the saturation of bug bounty market right now. And it may be one of a million reasons. Whereas working on home environments or lab environments and then being able to write up blog posts, things like that, I feel like are much more beneficial to you as a student or someone who's recently graduated.
Yeah, and the other, and I know you mentioned it a little bit there. The other thing to look at too is there are many assets to pen testing. There are several different ways to go about it. We have teams solely developed on web app. We have teams solely developed on cloud, different things like that. And then we cross between those. You've got to figure out what really tickles your fancy there. Hack the Box and Try Hack Me are both great resources for experimenting and playing around with those environments and figuring out, like, I really like doing this kind of pen testing. Thoughts on password managers with the master password being a single point of compromise? I say, and Nick, this will be a question for both of us. Um, yes, there does exist the risk that that master password could be compromised. But if you have the application, on a device that is password protected, and then the application itself, whatever, password manager you choose, as long as they have an extremely robust password and it's not just sitting on notepad somewhere, it's right up here in the old noggin, or, written on a scrap of paper, something on their desk. That's usually okay, right? It's not a daily driver for us to be trying to pop password managers. The encryption that they use is extremely robust, and we're not just sitting there beating on those, because that would be um, quite a waste of cycles for most of them. So
Yeah, I can say from my experience, I would absolutely love to get into someone's password manager. The times that's actually happened though is extremely thin. A lot of the times, if I do, it's because they're either reusing the password between the password manager and an AD account, or it's because I found a password manager like master password stored somewhere in a file share, and then it's kind of a toss up of if that data is stale or not as well.
yeah, yeah. So again, there is that inherent risk, but if you really drive the point home of, hey, we're giving you password managers, but your responsibility is set, minimum 15 to 20 characters, something just obnoxious. You only have to type it in once, so just memorize it, throw it, somewhere on a notepad or something on your desk, not on your computer. So that way you can do that. EDR killing and tampering becoming a common method for pen tests. That's one of those things where it kind of comes in waves, right? So it used to be that killing the EDR service was pretty commonplace. Finding it, killing it, restarting that service, whatever. That is not as much the case anymore, and that's not to say that that won't become the case again. A lot of EDR vendors got smart quick and caught on to that's what we were doing, so they put controls in place to prevent you from doing that. And they also put, break glass scenarios in case, so that if that service gets tampered, it triggers an alert. The tampering of that service starts firing off alarms left and right. So again, that's going to come in waves and ebb and flow. Yes and no. And that's not really the great answer to that, but it depends on the environment. It depends on the vendor. It depends on where we are with the tooling and stuff like that. Oftentimes it's better to just try to evade it than it is to try to just outright kill it. That's kind of where we are in the environment. We want to evade as opposed to kill.
I do see we have 3 more questions. We can run through these pretty quickly, and then I think that'll be all for our questions here. So, David, do you have any recommendations on a SIM?
We are vendor agnostic. So that's the and unfortunately that's just how it is. We can't claim one vendor or another, because we must remain vendor agnostic. Just the short and dirty answer to that is get a seam, do some research, ask around the industry, figure out what works best, figure out what's good rated, what would work well in your environment. Have the vendors come in and sell you their seam, right? Set up several vendors to come in. They'll buy you lunch, they'll give you freebies, whatever. Have them come in, do their sales pitch, try it out in your environment, see what works best for your team. Just have a seam and start ingesting those logs. For students, how do we set up a vulnerable infrastructure to practice during a GitHub repository that helps with setting things up? Yes, that is that GOAD, Game of Active Directory. Um, you can find that on GitHub. There's a really good walkthrough on there as well. Get on YouTube, find GOAD walkthroughs, and it'll really kind of help walk you through that step by step.
And then last part here, I do see how much of your internal penetration pen test enumeration is automated slash scripted versus running all of the tools individually. So personally for me, it goes by tester, but personally for me, what I like to do is I like to take a stance of trust but verify. So I do automate a lot of what I do, and I like to go through my automation and go through and see what I get for output. But what I always do after going through that automation and doing those initial checks is running the tools individually and making sure the output is either the same
Mhm.
or roughly similar. Some things may change, very very small changes within the environment or how things are parsed. But making sure that we're doing that manually as well, and making sure that that manual output matches what we're getting from the tooling is really essential to making sure that we're getting full coverage in a penetration test. In my personal opinion.
For sure, yeah. And tools are constantly breaking. Like I said, tools are evolving and changing. And I'm with Nick. I like to double check what I'm doing. I have, several of those attacks you can use one tool for. Sometimes I'll use both tools. If I know that the output is going to be the same on both tools, that makes me feel better as a pen tester. Okay, this is actually a valid thing. I now have 2 routes that have shown me this. Let's go ahead and try to exploit it. And then that also helps, navigate any issues that may have with, well, this tool is being blocked, but this one isn't because the coding is different. It's using this version of LDAP as opposed to that version, et cetera, et cetera. There's also, Windows tools like Rubius and things. The Impact Toolkit might be blocked, but they're not blocking Rubius. So I go over here and run the Rubius toolkit as opposed to it. And then the last one is, are you going to integrate the new TriMark research and tools into Trusted Sec services? I don't know if we're allowed to comment on that right away. We love the Trimar guys and everything they're bringing, and what I can say is we have a lot of good stuff coming from that. There's a lot of really really cool stuff that's fixing to come out of that, with that that merger, and that partnership that we've developed with them. So be on the lookout because there's some good stuff in the works.
Right. And that wraps up all the questions. We are just a little bit over time here, but thank you all for coming, and thanks for all the questions. We're really happy to answer all those and have you all out for today. But with all that being said, thank you so much, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If at any time you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to any of us. You can find us on socials, on the Discord, on X, Twitter, whatever. And if you'd love to have a conversation about any of the stuff we talked about today, you'd like to, get your first pen test done or have us look at it, we'd love to have a conversation with you about any of the services we offer. So reach out and let's chat.